Truth in My Days podcast is sponsored by the Truth in My Days ministry. Welcome to the Truth in My Days podcast, where we defend the Word of God against the challenges of men.
Hello, this is Sonia. I'm here with Truth in My Days director John Torse for a discussion about another important topic.
Hi, Sonia. I understand you want to talk about elements in the Bible, things that seem quaintly mythical, almost the sort of things you would read about in the National Enquirer, that sort of stuff. What exactly did you have in mind?
So I was thinking about things that aren't one-time miracles, but things that seem to be sprinkled throughout. Stuff like, three things in particular, stuff like those long lifespans in Genesis. How do we have all these people living for hundreds of years? And mythical animals like a unicorn or dragons, and even there seems to be giants in the Bible. In those days, there were giants on the earth or something like that.
Okay, I see what you're getting at. The idea of a miracle, that's not a problem for Christians. If God exists, which he does, then of course he can do miracles. And the way he's built the world, it operates according to natural laws, gravitation, electromagnetism, and so on. And those laws that God put in place govern the normal operation of the world. But every once in a while, God can override or set aside those laws in order to do something, and that would be a miracle. For example, when Jesus turned water to wine, that's setting aside normal operations because water is made out of hydrogen and oxygen. Wine has all sorts of other elements in it in combinations that don't exist in water. So to turn water into wine would have required a special miraculous operation where the normal operation is set aside and the miracle takes place. Not every time a miracle happens does it require setting aside natural processes. Sometimes God simply uses natural processes in an accelerated fashion. We read in Exodus, for example, when the sea parted in order to allow the Israelites to cross and escape the pursuing Egyptian army. We read that God caused a strong wind to blow upon the ocean and push the waters aside. But that's different from what we're talking about here, because this is where normal operations are set aside. God steps in and does something, and that's a miracle. It looks like we're looking at things where they're just natural parts of the world. They're presented as something that's just happening naturally, and God is not stepping in to set aside normal operating principles in order to do these things. They're just there. For example, those long ages of the patriarchs in Genesis, where they're living 900 plus years, and just one after another is doing this with no indication that this is not just natural for them. So this is different from looking simply at miracles. So yes, you're right, Syed, that this is a very, very good thing to look at. Which one would you like to start with?
Let's talk about those incredibly long lifespans.
Okay, good starting point. How long did the people live? Well, the first man, Adam, we're told he lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912. His son Enosh, 905. His son Canaan, 910. Mahalaleel only made it to 895. Yared made it up to 962. Enoch was an outlier. He only made it to 365. We read that he was not, for God took him. So it looks like he didn't die. He was translated into heaven. So that number doesn't really affect what we're looking at. Methuselah is the longest. He lived 969 years. And then Lamech, Noah's father, lived 777. So he's sort of an outlier there as well. But we don't know how he died. It could have been an accident. Could have been illness. Noah then lived 950 years. So definitely these are very, very long lifespans. But I'd have to ask, what exactly do you find strange about that?
People don't live nearly that long these days. And also, I don't hear about, outside of the Bible, I don't hear about other historical figures living that long.
Okay. Well, we have to ask a couple of questions there. If people don't live that long today, why don't they live that long today? And how long could they, in theory, live? Because if people don't live that long now, and they haven't for many centuries, does that necessarily mean it's impossible that at one point in time they could live that long? I came across this article, it's called The Conversation, which bills itself as academic rigor, journalistic flair. Under this article titled, "Is There a Natural Limit to How Long Humans Can Live?" And we tend to think, well, yeah, of course there is. And certainly that is the common thinking. An article from the journal Nature, October 2016, an article entitled "Evidence for Limits to Human Lifespan." In this article, they suggest that there's a natural limit, okay, and it's around what we're seeing today. We show that improvements in survival with age tend to decline after age 100, and the age of death of the world's oldest person has not increased since the 1990s. Our results strongly suggest that the maximum lifespan of humans is fixed and subject to natural constraints. Another article from 2017 says that scientists have discovered the maximum age a human can live to. According to the article, research conducted in the Netherlands has found that the maximum lifespan for females is 115.7 years and for men 114.1 years. And that obviously and clearly is not even close to what we would have to account for those lengthy lifespans in the patriarchal periods. A more recent article from Nature Communications 2021 entitled "Longitudinal Analysis of Blood Markers Reveals Progressive Loss of Resilience and Predicts Human Lifespan Limit."
What do they mean, loss of resilience?
The ability of your body to recover from illness and injury. Normally we get sick, we get better. Our immune system fights it off. But the older you get, the more dangerous these things are. When you're young, flu is usually no big deal. You get it, you recover. But the older you get, the more dangerous flu becomes. And flu ends up killing a lot of people every year. And they're mostly old people because their resilience, their ability to fight it off, goes down the older they get. According to this particular article, it says that around the critical point of 120 to 150 years of age, you're going to hit a complete loss of resilience. So the first thing you get is going to kill you.
Do we even have enough people living that long to be able to discover something like that?
Well, we don't actually. These are, as it's an extrapolation of this trend. They're looking at what we see, and from that trying to figure out what the theoretical maximum would be. This is one way to try to figure out the maximum human lifespan, studying the trends and trying to extrapolate from it. But according to this other article from Volume 1 of a classified bibliography of gerontology and geriatrics, when we look at that, we find that the kind of calculation, this kind of what we call actuarial calculations, it's always complex and it's often wrong. In 1921, it was demonstrated by scientists that ages above 105 were impossible. Impossible. Well, we have had people living past 105, and the scientific studies then say that the maximum is about 115, and then the last one we looked at has it around 120, up to 150. So you reach a study that says this is the absolute limit. Well, that's the absolute limit until you get to a next study, a later study that says something different. So this is the problem with knowing. However, there's still a world of difference between 105, 115, 120, 150, and 900. So we still haven't really answered the question. On the other hand, we do have to take seriously this claim that estimating the limits to longevity is problematic because every maximum limit to lifespan so far proposed has been surpassed. And we're told that this kind of calculation is complex and often wrong. And why is that? Any ideas?
Well, I guess if you're just extrapolating, then it's always inaccurate. But what about telomeres? I heard that when people's cells reproduce, the string gets shorter and shorter, and eventually it will run out. Couldn't that be a way to tell the maximum length of a person's life?
Yeah, what's a telomere? Our audience wants to know.
I can't remember for sure, I heard about this in high school biology. I remember it had something to do with the, I think, cell reproduction, how every time a little bit of the chain will be lost and cut off, and this telomere gets shorter and shorter, so how long that is determines how long a person can live.
Yeah, basically the sections at the end of the cell when it reproduces and a bit is lost, the telomere is sort of like this sacrificial lamb. It's able to be lost. It loses that rather than crucial stuff. But yeah, each time the cell reproduces, that telomere gets shorter and shorter. And the thinking is that eventually you're going to get to a point where the telomere is gone, and then when you're losing material, you're losing crucial material when the cells continue to divide. But that is one theory. Okay? Looking at extrapolations is one way to try to get a maximum, studying the trends in the human lifespan. Another method then would be looking at how our organs decline with age, the age at which they stop working. Eye function, for example, how much oxygen we use while exercising. These are things that, as you get older, tend to decline. And generally, when we calculate and extrapolate, we'll say that these organs will function only till about you're 120 years old. On the other hand, though, we do find variations among people. For some people, kidney function declines rapidly as you get older. But other people get older and older, and their kidney function hardly changes at all. We'll come back to the telomeres claim generally, but before we do that, these extrapolations, what do you notice about all of these studies?
The sample size is not very big.
Well, the sample size can be big, I guess, certainly statistically significant, although, yes, out of all people who ever lived, the problem is it's not stratified. If we look at this article we looked at before, Evidence for a Limit to Human Lifespan, we see the method. It says we're analyzing global demographic data. So they're looking at ages at which people die from all over the world. This other one says that we looked at, the scientists have discovered the maximum age a human can live to. This conclusion was come to by statisticians who studied data from 75,000 people who have died in the Netherlands in the last 30 years. So 75,000 people is a lot of people, but they're all from the Netherlands, and it's all the last 30 years. All of these kind of calculations are based on looking at what people are doing now, what people are doing now, what they've been doing for the last 50, 100 years, 150 years at most. That's where all our data is drawn from. And so all this can suggest is what is the maximum for people alive today. That's not really a theoretical limit for how long people could live. Let me show you another one. This is quite recent as well. 2023. It's less than a year old. Look at the headline. How old can humans get? An expert on aging thinks humans could live to be 1,000 years old with a few tweaks to our genetic software. 1,000 years old.
Well, that's even longer than the patriarchs.
Well, that would be the theoretical maximum. So we have a maximum. If the theoretical maximum today is 120, most people don't quite get to 120.
Or not even close.
Yeah, but more and more people do. But the number of centenarians, 100-year-old people, is going up. But if the theoretical limit is 1,000 years old, then people living 900 years is not all that strange. Well, we have to look at what he says here. The researcher is João Pedro de Magalhães, a professor of molecular biogerontology at the Institute of Inflammation and Aging at the University of Birmingham in England. Yeah, and he's done a study looking at the genomes of some very long-lived animals like bowhead whales and naked mole rats. He says if we eliminated aging at the cellular level, humans could live for a millennium or more.
Well, gee, isn't that kind of like saying, well, if we could eliminate all diseases that affect the organs, that then humans could live for a millennium or more? Well, how can you do that?
It's not exactly that, though, because you're under entropy, your organs tend to wear out anyway, even without diseases.
And your cells, too. No.
Yeah. The question is, how fast does that have to be? And the reason this is sort of a conundrum trying to figuring out is because we all know why people get old and die, but the reality is we don't really know. No one knows for sure. There are actually currently more than 300 theories on why people die, and the telomere one is one of the theories out of more than 300. This comes from an article called The Synopsis on Aging, Theories, Mechanisms, and Future Prospects by João Pinto da Costa et al., Aging Research Review 2016. Some of the theories are what they call programmed cell theories, error theories, genetic theories, evolutionary theories, biochemical theories, damage-related factors. Your telomere would go under genetic theory or go under programmed cell theory. There's so many theories because no one really knows what or what combination of factors makes people get old and die. But let's suppose both. Let's suppose both of them are factors. Obviously, the environment in which you live, the more dangers and threats there are to you, the more your chances are that you're going to die sooner. If you live inside a nuclear reactor, you're going to die very quickly because all that radiation will damage your cells to the point where huge cancerous growths will happen and you'll die very quickly. Apart from all that, if you're living somewhere where you're not in a nuclear reactor, you're not subject to strong sunshine all the time, your chances of being damaged by radiation become much lower. So definitely the damage-related factors does seem to play a part, and so probably as genetic factors like the telomere theory you were talking about, and then general genetic decay. As human beings live, their DNA gets damaged, and some of that damage is passed on to the next generation, and the next generation picks up some damage of their own, and so on. So before we look into this, the causes, let's look at the biblical accounts. Yeah, so we look at the biblical accounts in Genesis related to this question. What do you notice? Okay. First question is, what was lifespan like before the flood? Okay, we're looking at a graph here, but you can read it in your own Bible. What were the ages, the recorded ages for these generations before the flood?
So those are around 900 something usually. Yes.
What we see is a very steady pattern. You take out Enoch, who was taken away by God, and it's very, very close scattering of the data points around the year, a bit more than 900. And very, very consistent. What do you see after the flood?
There's a steep decline.
There's a steep decline of lifespans after the flood.
Yeah, very steep decline, then eventually it levels off.
Eventually it levels off. So that's called an exponential decay. So, according to the Bible, before the flood, it was a very consistent kind of lifestyle. There were outliers, but an average of 926 years, 810 if you include Lamech. So it's slightly under João Pedro de Magalhães' maximum. And is there any corroboration for this? You mentioned there's no other record of people in the ancient world living long periods of time, but in fact there is. There's something called the Sumerian king list. And the Sumerian king lists were found on tablets and manuscripts from the ancient civilization of Sumer, or Mesopotamia, which was thought to be the first human civilization in history. It grew up in that area between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the Middle East, around what is present-day Iraq. And these records, the Sumerian king list, it records the names of a series of kings in ancient Sumeria who all lived before the flood. The Sumerian records do include an account of a worldwide flood that destroyed everybody except one hero on a boat that he built to ride out this worldwide flood, and those that he preserved on the boat with him. And this kind of flood account, actually, you find in the mythology or handed down history of disparate cultures from all over the world. Native peoples in the Americas, native peoples in Australia, in Africa, all over the world, the ancient Chinese as well. The story that there was a worldwide flood, one person, perhaps a group of people, but one hero who led the way, built a boat to ride out the flood. Now, if you have this account in the historical memories of all of these different people from all over the world, what does that suggest to you?
That there really was a worldwide flood. Do all these peoples, besides the Sumerians, also have any records of super long-living people before the flood?
Well, I'm not aware of other ones other than Sumerians. That doesn't mean there aren't any. It just means I'm not aware of them. The fact that you have this kind of flood account in all these disparate cultures suggests, as you say, that is a real historical event. And everybody descended from those people who got off that boat, that ark, and passed on the accounts of what happened through the generations to their people. The stories probably got garbled in many cases and deviated in all kinds of details from the original, but the core is still there. And this is strong evidence that the worldwide flood did actually happen. Now, back to the Sumerian king list. They have this list of 8 kings, one after the other, who lived before the flood. And it records the lengths of their reigns. And they have fantastically long lifespans. Fantastically long lifespans. These 8, understand, they don't include the first man, and they don't include the man who was there at the time of the flood.
Why not?
We don't know why. We just know they don't have those. Now, if you look at the Genesis list, we have 10 of these antediluvian patriarchs from Adam to Noah. If you take out the first man, Adam, you take out the one who was there at the flood, Noah, you're left with 8. And we can compare those 8 to the 8 in the Sumerian king lists. The average lifespan for these Sumerian kings, you think 900 is bad? 30,150 years.
Well, the world isn't even that old.
Yeah, you add them all together, you get 241,200 years. Okay, that's fantastically long, and people would tend to say, that's impossible. Even Pedro de Magalhães would say that's impossible, presumably. And we'd also say, well, that doesn't really back up the Bible, does it? But here's the thing. They looked fantastically long until scholars discovered that the ancient Sumerians used a sexagesimal numbering system, unlike we do, and unlike the ancient Hebrews, who use a decimal numbering system. If you have a number like 222, the rightmost digit is the units digit. The next digit to the left is the tens digit, 10 to the exponent 1. The next leftmost is the hundredths digit, which is 10 to the exponent 2. If you had another one beside that, it would be 10 to the exponent 3, which would be 1,000. So you have the units digit, then you have 10 to the 1, which is the tens, 10 to the 2, which is the hundreds, 10 to the 3, which is thousands, and so on. The Sumerians didn't use base 10, they used base 60. So you'd have like the units digit, then you'd have 60 to the exponent 1, 60 to the exponent 2, and so on, which would make the numbers look a lot bigger than ours. So if somebody had access to the Genesis data, and they wrote it as if it were sexagesimal, which is what they were familiar with, rather than decimal, these are the lifespans you would get. When you convert them to decimal, they come out matching pretty much exactly what you have in the Bible. So in fact, you do have this other culture that records this list of 8 people in succession, leaving out the first man and the man at the time of the flood, so corresponding to everything from Seth to Lamech in Genesis, living pretty much exactly the same numbers as you see in Genesis.
You mean these 8 kings have ages that are the same as all the patriarchs between Adam and Noah?
That's the way I understand it, and certainly the total is equal to the exact total.
Okay, but
it's not always so easy to convert sexagesimal to decimal, but that's pretty much what it comes out to.
You've said this is independent corroboration and there's a different culture. Why then would they be listing the patriarchs from another culture as kings?
For the same reason that they all have a flood story, because this history was passed down through generations. Those 8 people who got off the ark would have the same memory of who lived before them, who were those 10 men from Adam through to Noah. And they would carry that information, they would pass it down through the generations. As the population grew, people spread out, went to different parts of the world, created their own civilizations and their own mythology based on the history they remembered, which might have been garbled, but they still carried that information with them, including these people who lived before the flood and how long they lived. And they would have written it as sexagesimal, and so the numbers look so much bigger, but in fact actually do correspond to what you see in the Bible. So you do have this independent corroboration. Another ancient Near Eastern civilization has that in their so-called mythology, their historical memories, that before the flood, people lived this fantastic long number of years, which in our years would be about 900, a bit more than 900.
So if this is only in what you said, Near Eastern culture, could somebody say, well, this is just a feature of Near Eastern mythology, because unlike the flood, we don't see this kind of account all over the world, just in the Near Eastern civilization?
Well, it would stand to reason that the people who live closest to where these events happen and having communication with one another would do a better job of retaining more of the information than those who would scatter off and go much further to the east or to the south. It might be there in other, so we didn't know it was in Sumerian records until we found these king lists. There might be other things out there to find, but the point remains that you do have this record that there were people living before the flood to 900 plus years. If they got it from the same source, you could say that. Well, presumably that same source would be the historical reality. Now, before we look at and try to analyze on what this tells us about how this came about, let's look at the pattern after the flood as well. What happened after the flood? Look at this chart again, and now we're looking after the flood. What happens to the lifespans here?
Sudden steep decline.
A sudden steep decline after the flood, and it's, as I said, it's an exponential kind of decay. So much so that you can actually curve fit the data, the lifespan versus generation number, and actually work out an equation. Y equals 1,285.4 times x to the exponent negative 0.88. And that would curve fit your data very, very accurately. It's called a simple linear regression or curve fitting. So what does this suggest? Okay, before the flood, okay, what if the world was very different then? And what if the human race was very different then? Particularly when it comes to damage factors. People now die, leading causes of death, cancer, heart disease, many infections. What if some of these weren't present or were present on a much smaller scale in the antediluvian world? That means the world before the flood. We know, for example, that people were created perfect, which means there was no decay, no copying mistakes, no entropy in their genomes. That's something that developed through time. Those damage factors you're talking about, or they're talking about, takes time to build up. What if the world before the flood had other sorts of protections in place? There's some creationists who talk about a water vapor canopy surrounding the earth in the pre-flood times. One of the effects this would have would be to make the climate of the earth uniformly tropical all over the planet. And certainly the fossils we found from the polar areas tell us that, yes, once upon a time, these were tropical locations. Now, other creationists say, no, you couldn't possibly have a thick enough water canopy to account for all the waters of the flood, but nobody's suggesting that that's the case. It would have been just one out of three sources of water for the flood. Simply have a canopy, a protective canopy, is not unreasonable.
Okay, three sources. So besides the canopy, what would be the other two?
Well, the Genesis account talks about how the windows of heaven were open. That would be the collapse of the canopy to the earth. There's rain, of course, and the third is the fountains of the deep broke open. And that might have been the main source of the water. We know there's subterranean water. The water under the earth's crust, more water there than in all the oceans now. So there would have been plenty of water there to flood the earth. But before that, if there was this canopy, it would have served to protect people. People have much more pure genomes at the time. Even something like the Earth's magnetic field. The Earth's magnetic field, the Earth is actually a giant magnet. It's got field lines running from the north magnetic pole, joining the south magnetic pole, running this way. And it serves to protect Earth from the bombardment of particles from space, high energy charged particles. If these hit you, you're going to be in trouble. They're going to play havoc with you, with your genes, cause mutations and other kind of problems. But the Earth's magnetic field, the magnetic fields deflect charged particles. At the poles, in fact, you get these charged particles coming from space. They hit Earth's magnetic field and they start looping around and they spin in circles forever. They never escape from there. They're held off from the surface of the Earth. They never get here. In other parts, it's not right over the equator, or particles that aren't hitting exactly perpendicular go into a spinning spiral and eventually driven to the poles. But that's not where people live. So if you had these kind of a very different environment, more protections, pathogens may have become a problem only gradually, not immediately. So if all these were the case, then it stands to reason that people might have lived much longer before the flood.
If we don't believe in evolution, how could pathogens become a problem gradually?
Oh, we believe in what some people call microevolution or devolution. I don't think it's a good term, microevolution. The theory of evolution starts with you get a single cell. Let's not worry about where that cell came from. But that cell, through the eons, gave rise to all of these other types of living creatures, from all the different plants to all the different animals, going through simple things like sponges, and then up to amphibians and fishes and reptiles and birds and people and so on, along different trails, different chains. What that would require is that at all of these stages, many, 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 many times, qualitatively new, meaningful genetic data had to be generated by some kind of naturalistic process. If you take your single-celled animal, an amoeba, or protist, I guess, not animal, you take something like that, or a jellyfish, their genome does not have the coding for all the things, say, the human has. Where did that coding come from? According to evolution, it had to have developed through random mutations of the existing DNA and then survival of the fittest, natural selection to keep the good stuff. The problem with that is we have tried literally thousands upon thousands of times to try to tease out some genetic change in an organism that would show this happening, some new, qualitatively new and meaningful genetic coding comes into being by naturalistic processes. Never happened. Never happens. They had the Lenski's E. coli bacteria experiment. He's been at it for decades and taking these through, last I heard, 40,000 generations, probably more by now. And in terms of evolutionary timescale, 40,000 generations is huge. You should see a lot of changes. They got nothing. They made a big hoo-ha at one point when he found one of his populations of E. coli could suddenly metabolize citrate under aerobic conditions. In other words, it could eat citrate when even in the presence of air, which E. coli doesn't normally do. And that was sold as, see, here's exactly the kind of proof your creationists are asking for. But that wasn't the case. And if you read the actual scientific journal articles reporting, you'll know that. You'll also know that E. coli always had the ability to metabolize citrate, to eat citrate. But it normally does it in anaerobic conditions. In other words, where there's no air present, because it requires air to eat glucose, which is what it normally eats. But when there's no air around, it will eat citrate instead. And it's got a genetic switch so that if there's air, it turns off the genes that eat citrate. And when there's no air, it turns that back on. And what happened in this case is that particular population of E. coli, that genetic switch got inverted. It came under the control of a different operating suite of genes. So it's always in permanently the on position. And that's why it would metabolize, eat citrate, even when there was air. So nothing new was created, no new ability. It would kind of like taking your timer that you put in your house that will automatically turn on the lights during the night and then automatically turn them off during the day. And your automatic timer broke. It wouldn't turn off the lights. Lights are left on all the time. Who in his right mind would say, look, my automatic timer evolved a new ability to have the lights on during the day? Yeah, that's what happened. And it gets all kinds of great publicity in the newspapers, but if you bother to read the actual scientific journal articles, you find that they are completely misrepresenting what happened. So this never happens, and that makes one of the many things that makes the theory of evolution dead in the water. Now the opposite does happen, where you have a population of creatures with their genetic coding, and then you separate them off into different subgroups, and some of that data can become lost, or sometimes possibly repurposed. For example, when God created all animals, they ate plant matter. We see that in Genesis chapter 1. The plant matter was food for people, was food for animals, and all animals were originally plant eaters. It was after the fall, when the world was cursed, that some of them turned to carnivory, to eating each other. And which animals would be most successful at that? Obviously the ones that have tools that could be used for that.
Like the sharp teeth.
If you look at a panda bear, or you look at its sharp teeth, you think, this was obviously designed to eat flesh, obviously designed to, he must be a predator, hunts and kills. No, he doesn't. He uses those teeth to crunch hard bamboo, which is his prime source of food. Having big, sharp teeth doesn't necessarily make you a predator. There are bears, and bears are omnivores. They do eat flesh, and polar bears eat only flesh because there's no real plant matter up there for them to eat. But there are other bears that subsist primarily on berries and other plant matter. So this is what would happen is that as the animal population grew and spread out into subgroups, different kinds of genetic potential would come to the fore as others were lost. Studying genetic trees tells us that all of the dogs types of animals we have today, the domestic dog is different breeds, wolves, foxes, jackals, all of them developed from one original, what we call dog kind, and these offspring of the dog kind would spread out, going to different environments, and certain genetic potential would be lost. Nothing new was ever developed, but just by losing some, others would then come to the fore, and you get these kind of what we call speciation happening. That does happen. It'll be the same thing with the pathogens. Dog bacteria is actually very helpful for you. It lives in your gut. It helps to digest foods and things. But at some point, after the fall, some of these would become inimical to humans and become problematic. But that probably took a while before we had so many harmful pathogens as we do now. So that's the first thing before the flood. We can assume, or let's take that as a working assumption, that the environmental conditions before the flood were much better. And so this was one of the reasons that people lived longer. Maybe that's what they were designed to do originally. And we could ask, well, do we have any possible corroboration for this? And let me float you an interesting possible corroboration. And it is this. What does that say there?
So just how big was the Titanosaurus?
Titanosaurus, dinosaurs. People love dinosaurs because they're so big. And I remember when I was a little kid, the king, the one you'd always see on the cover of books was the Brontosaurus, which actually never even existed. But that was the big thing. And the Brontosaurus was like a Diplodocus, which is maybe 90 feet long. Now the biggest one we know of is the Titanosaurus, which is 120 feet long.
Thing is, how can we really tell how big these creatures were? Just like when evolutionists find bones from a supposed human ancestor, and then they make a model, and all the white part of the model is the part of the skull that's not there, and it's just imagined. So when you just find some bones, how can you really tell?
That's an excellent point, and sometimes it is difficult, and a lot of mistakes have been made in identifying dinosaur species. If I recall correctly, the Brontosaurus came about when scientists mistakenly stuck the skull of an Apatosaurus onto the body of a Diplodocus, and bing, bang, boom, created Brontosaurus. It's pretty embarrassing. When that came to light, I remember for a brief time, scientists were saying, oh, no, we knew that wasn't the right skull. We just put it on there for convenience because we didn't have the Diplodocus skull. But they quickly abandoned that because they realized it made them look ridiculous. So then they started saying, well, Brontosaurus is just another name for Apatosaurus. Never mind that we put it on the wrong body. But we found enough, I think, of bones together. We have like pretty much the entire skeleton that we can see that. Now, another issue is, another problem is nobody knows how many species there were, because in many cases, a young dinosaur, young specimen, which would grow up to a huge size, was just assumed to be a different species because it was smaller. So there are problems for sure in putting these together, and there are questions here and there. But in terms of the size, I think we can be pretty sure that, yeah, they were huge. And the Titanosaurus is supposed to be 120 feet long. The question then becomes, why did we have such huge animals then, land animals, and we don't have them now? Well, we have huge ones now. Blue whale is still the champion, the biggest animal ever, bigger than the Titanosaurus. But they live in the water, so you can get a lot bigger in the water. Why don't we have such huge land animals now? Our biggest is the African elephant. Look at how teeny weeny that is compared to the Titanosaurus. It's very, very, very much smaller. So why is that the biggest we get now? And that's a question that scientists do try to answer. And let's take a quick listen to some of their explanations for why dinosaurs were so large. You're going to float a few theories. We'll listen to each one, and then we'll discuss it before we continue.
This is the start of the recording from the YouTube video.
Sauropods are the biggest dinosaurs and dwarf even the largest land mammal, Paraceratherium. But how did they grow to such colossal sizes? And why? There are limits to how big living things can grow up to, from how thick legs have to be made to support a hefty body, to how blood gets efficiently pumped around the body, and lots more. There are a number of theories, such as dinosaur size was fueled by vegetation. During the Mesozoic, including the Triassic, Jurassic, and the Cretaceous, carbon dioxide was a lot more abundant in the atmosphere. Increased carbon dioxide increases the global temperature. The global climate was a lot warmer millions of years ago than it is today. The high levels of carbon dioxide meant that plants had to recycle more and more carbon dioxide, and thus the world was full of many types of vegetation. Dinosaurs, especially herbivores, may have evolved to massive sizes because there were a lot of plants to eat.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
What do you think of that theory? Does that make sense?
Well, the part about the Earth being a lot warmer matches up with our theory before the flood also. But it sounds like there are lots of plants to eat. Okay, so then that could explain if the dinosaurs got, I don't know, really fat. But how can their skeletons keep getting bigger?
Yeah, that is kind of the problem. We have more to eat now. It's making us fatter. It's not making us taller. Yeah, this is the problem. Like the size is genetically programmed. It's not like, oh wow, I got so much food here, and it's going to be like this for the next 10 million years. So why don't my children just get bigger? Okay? You can't make that happen. Okay? More food doesn't make you get bigger. It can make you get fatter, but it's not going to change your skeletal structure or make you 120 feet long. That's just an absolutely absurd theory. But listen to the next part of it and see how much more absurd it gets. And by the way, again, you would have to get qualitatively new genetic information for this to happen, for the dinosaur to get bigger. And you would need an awful lot of other changes as well. Like they said, you must have like much thicker bones and legs to hold.
I like how the
weight.
guy said how thick the legs would have to be made.
Good point, yeah. Random natural processes don't make things. Creators make things. But let's listen to the next part and see how absurd this gets.
This is the start of the recording from the YouTube video.
Bigger sauropod means bigger prey. This means that carnivores possibly evolved to eat these massive herbivores, and when they killed and ate the herbivores, they ate more food, as the herbivores were big with the process that I just explained, and thus they became bigger.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
Oh, it's just the same thing, except instead of getting the calories from the plants, they're getting them from meat, but still, they'll just get fatter, not bigger.
I know, but stop and think about how absurd this gets. Supposedly, evolution retains things that are beneficial to survival. If getting bigger means you just get eaten by big carnivores, how does that help you survive? Wouldn't you rather stay small and escape the attention of these big carnivores?
True.
And even more absurd, here's the thing. Oh, now these plant eaters got huge because they had so much plant material to eat. Now you got all these big, gigantic sauropods. So the carnivorous dinosaurs want to eat them. That's why they got so big, right?
Yeah.
But here's the problem. That means they started out small. You got these gigantic sauropods. These little carnivorous reptiles, they can't take down these giant sauropods. What do they eat for the 20 million years it takes them to evolve enough size so that they can take them down?
Well, maybe they're smaller, but just more aggressive.
Yeah, can you imagine like a poodle yapping at an African elephant, and you think that the poodle can be really aggressive, but is it going to be able to eat the elephant?
Maybe they attack in a pack.
Do you think a pack of poodles can take down an African elephant?
I guess not.
No, I wouldn't think so. They're not even listening. They almost make it look like, ooh, sauropods are giant. Ooh, we carnivores have to become giant. So, boom, snap your finger and suddenly they're big. But it wouldn't happen that way. By their theory, it would take millions of years before they got big enough to actually eat these sauropods.
Well, unless it's one of those things where the gene for being big gets turned on by environmental factors.
Do they actually have genes for getting big to this extent?
Guess we don't know.
Yeah. So let's see if they have a better theory.
This is the start of the recording from the YouTube video.
Another theory is that dinosaurs grew to massive sizes simply for protection and self-defense. Gigantism is thought by some scientists to be an evolutionary advantage and gave dinosaurs immunity to predators and protection, but also brought disadvantages such as slow speed and the need for limited population size.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
Isn't this contradicting the other one? Now that they got big because it's a survival advantage, but on the other hand, they're big and then that makes predators want to eat them.
That's what I was thinking. This is kind of like they're not even listening to themselves. They got big as a protection against predators, but predators got big because now you had big animals for them to eat. So how does getting big protect you when it just makes you a nice, more luscious snack for the giant carnivores? How does that make sense?
This is the start of the recording from the YouTube video.
The last theory that I will be discussing is that massive dinosaur size is a side effect of cold-bloodedness. Most of the paleontologists that study sauropods regard as true that sauropods were cold-blooded because of two convincing arguments. First, based on physiological models, a warm-blooded sauropod would have basically baked itself completely. Second, no warm-blooded mammals such as elephants, giraffes, or zebras come close to the size of sauropods. This is where a sauropod's massive size becomes an advantage. Scientists believe that if a sauropod evolved to sizes big enough, that it would have achieved quote-unquote homeothermy, or the capacity to preserve its inferior temperature regardless of its environment's condition.
This is the end of the recording from the YouTube video.
So many little lizards around. How come they're not all giants? They're cold-blooded, aren't they?
That's an excellent point. Many dinosaurs were not huge. Many dinosaurs were the size of a goat or a cat. So if you needed to be big to achieve homeothermy, what happened to all the small dinosaurs? Why didn't they all die?
Well, I guess people say they did all die now.
Oh no, but it took them millions of years, and they were killed by a meteor or some such excuse, not because they couldn't achieve homeothermy.
Killed by meteors? Well, why don't those meteors kill everything then? Why just the big ones, like the dinosaurs?
No, they kill, yeah. Mammals are the size of some of the small dinosaurs. They survived somehow, and dinosaurs didn't somehow, but cold-blooded animals are cold-blooded. They match the environment temperature in which they are. So they do not achieve homeothermy by getting big. Now, what's the takeaway from all this?
They don't know why dinosaurs are so big.
Exactly. They have no idea. They have no idea why dinosaurs are so big. And they'll say things like that, and it's really just bluffs to make it sound like, oh, we have good, viable theories. They really don't. But here, consider this possible explanation. Something called indeterminate growth. Have you heard of indeterminate growth before?
Yes, I think some creatures like alligators or something just keep getting bigger as long as they live.
That's right. Human beings and most animals their genetic programming is such that they grow to maturity. Their organ system is fully finished, and so on. At that point, they stop growing in size. They can get fat if they eat too much, but their maximum size is fixed in the genetic coding. But there are some types of animals, okay, that grow rapidly until they reach maturity, and then they continue to grow not quite as fast, it's more slow, but they keep growing and growing until they die.
So like a tree.
Like a tree. A lot of plants are indeterminate growers as well. But some animals, in particular reptiles, amphibians, fish, and some mollusks. Okay? Because reptiles, amphibians, fish, and some mollusks. If we look back at this graph of lifespans before and after the flood, and consider that perhaps the conditions in the pre-flood world were conducive to living a long time, that environment would also help animals to live a long time, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yes. If animals lived much longer then, it wouldn't make a difference for a lot of them, but for the indeterminate growers, they'd have a lot more time to get bigger, much bigger. Again, it's common in reptiles, amphibians, fish, and some mollusks. And as we look at the fossil record, we find, yes, some mollusks were monster-sized compared to mollusks today. Here's a picture of one type, the Parapuzosia separadensis. It's like as tall as a human and much more massive.
Whoa.
It's like an ammonite, and these things like hold in your hand the ones that we have today. Some mollusks, fish were much bigger. The so-called prehistoric fish. If you watch movies and you've seen Megalodon, there's this Carcharodon, Megalodon. It's a supposedly prehistoric, supposedly extinct shark. And here's here's the great white shark in size compared to man. Great white shark is what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 meters long. Whereas the Carcharodon Megalodon, it's about 19 meters long. It's more than 3 times the size. Look at how big that shark is compared to a person. And the great white shark compared to much huger. And it's not just sharks. The so-called bony fish, the osteichthyes, the ray fin fish, the largest verified specimen for the ray fin fish, 2,744 kilograms. Record-size ocean sunfish, 14 feet long from fin to fin, 10 feet in length, weighed about 2,300 kilograms, 5,100 pounds. The longest bony fish on Earth today is the giant oarfish, which has gone up to a length of 25 feet. This one is much thinner than the sunfish, so its weight was about 606 pounds. Much larger bony fish existed prehistorically, the largest ever known having been Leedsichthys, your sunfish, 14 feet long, your oarfish, 25 feet long, the Leedsichthys, 72 feet long.
Estimated.
Yeah. Well, no, the estimates go up to 27 meters. The ones that's deemed the most realistic based on our extant evidence is 22 meters, 72 feet. Could have gone up to 89 feet. And you saw the weights we had there, 6,000 pounds, so 3 tons. The Leedsichthys went up to 25 to 30 tons. That's the most realistic estimate. Some estimates go up to 50 tons. So they were much huger. And then amphibians. Amphibians, things like your little newts, your salamanders, your frogs. So some of your frogs can be pretty big today, like the size of a softball. But it's nothing compared to the kind of sizes you had for amphibians in the prehistoric times. Look at this Mastodonsaurus. Looks like it's almost 6 meters long. That's pretty big, isn't it? So, which were the indeterminate growers? Reptiles, amphibians, fish, some type of mollusk. That's exactly what we find in so-called prehistoric time. We got this huge mollusk, huge fish, huge amphibians, and then we got your reptiles. Biggest reptile we have today. Remember, dinosaurs are supposed to be reptiles. The biggest reptile is the crocodile. The largest crocodile ever measured was 20 feet 3 inches long. That's quite a monster crocodile. That's like 3 people, 3 good-sized people, and weighed 2,370 pounds, okay? Over 1,000 kilograms. Okay? That's a pretty big reptile, but obviously much, much smaller than the Titanosaurus. However, indeterminate growth. Crocodiles, the lifespan for crocodiles today is ranges from 25 to 70 years. The maximum on record was 75 years in the wild. In captivity, 110 years. That's an old crocodile, and they get up to like 20 feet long. But imagine if instead of growing for 75 years, they're going for 600, 700, 800, 900 years. And they never stop growing. At that rate of growth, your crocodile could have been 300 meters long. Titanosaur, 300 feet long. Titanosaur is only 120 feet. So suddenly, if we consider that the environment before the flood, the ancient, the antediluvian world, was much more conducive to long life, not just to humans, but to animals, and that included reptiles, which are indeterminate growers, would have been so much huger than anything we have now. And there you go. That explains how dinosaurs got really big and why they were so big. It could also explain how Noah got dinosaurs on the ark, because these things weren't normally so huge. They were so huge when they lived a long time. So you take a few young specimens and, you can probably put them in a dog cart. And the evolutionists, they have no explanation for why dinosaurs were so big. But this model explains that perfectly and gives you good corroboration. Another line of corroboration showing that, it stands to reason that before the flood, the world was different, and animals and people lived a much longer time, up to that theoretical maximum from the Magalhaes' estimate.
Thank you for listening to the Truth in My Days podcast with John Torse. If you like our content, please share this information with family and friends. It helps us a lot. We also would love to hear from you. You can reach us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube by searching Truth in My Days as one word again. Truth in My Days as one word. No spaces in between. Or reach us by email at info@truthinmydays.com. You may also visit our website for more comprehensive material and to learn more about our ministry. Our website is truthinmydays.com. Thank you.